The members had 4 calls. He doesn't get any more. Okay. Phil Twyford.
Quite enough, Mr Nash. Thank you, Mr Chairman. I want to come back to some of the comments that were made by Jamie Lee Ross earlier in the debate, where he talked about the rationale for this legislation and the argument that we've touched on today about whether, in fact, the associated legislation, the Bright Line test and the requirement for non-resident foreign buyers of residential property to register with Inland Revenue, that Part 2 is enabling, the debate about whether that's had any effect or not. And we have data right now, actually, right up to the minute, released by REINS, the Real Estate Institute of New Zealand, that shows that, in fact, in the last month, the median house price in Auckland, the market most affected by the problems that this bill is purportedly trying to address, the median's gone up by $70,000. $70,000, that's 1.5 times the median income. And I think it really undermines any kind of optimism that we've been hearing from members on the government benches that the Bright Line test and the residential land withholding tax and the requirement for non-resident foreign buyers to register with Inland Revenue has had any kind of sustained impact on the speculative pressures that have been overheating the Auckland housing market. Jamie Lee Ross mounted a great spirited defence of the intention test as if this was enough and if this was working. But he's completely stymied by the fact that the government introduced this legislation and these measures, presumably to tackle some kind of real problem, or was it an imagined problem? It wasn't clear from what Jamie Lee Ross was saying. The residential land withholding tax is in place there in this bill in Part 2 to ensure that the Bright Line test applies to non-resident foreign buyers. And as Jacinda Ardern pointed out, Inland Revenue in their advice on this bill raised the point that we don't have the data, that we don't know what is the scale of non-resident foreign buyers in the Auckland market. When the policy announcement was made that led to this bill and others, the government, I think it was Stephen Joyce, the Honourable Stephen Joyce, said that the government would release the data that they would be gathering on non-resident foreign buyers by way of the requirement that they should register and open a bank account and register with Inland Revenue, that they would make this data available by April the 16th. Well, we're getting very near to April the 16th, and yet there's been nary a whimper from the government on the data, on the question of this data and what it shows. But interestingly, Shamabeel Yaacob, the independent economist, a couple of weeks ago in the media, said that, and it appeared that he has some kind of access to the data that's been gathered. He said that, Shamabeel Yaacob said in the media that 330 properties per month on average have been bought by non-resident foreign buyers, on average over the last 6 months. 330 properties since the law came into force, requiring foreign buyers to register with Inland Revenue. Now, that volume of sales, 330 on average per month over 6 months, that would account for 5% of all house sales across New Zealand, which is significant, I think. And as Shamabeel Yaacob said at the time, but it's probably more likely to be 18% of all sales in the Auckland market because the presence of non-resident foreign buyers has been so heavily concentrated in Auckland. So if it's anything like 18% of sales in the Auckland market, it's no wonder the government hasn't made any kind of move so far to release that data, and I would guess that they won't. Colleen Milne of the Real Estate Institute of New Zealand also said recently that these new tax rules, she said, seem to be having limited impact. And she predicted that the decline in sales that has been seen, I think, over November, December, January, where there's no doubt there's been a sort of softening in the Auckland market. Colleen Milne from Real Estate Institute of New Zealand predicted that this decline would be transitory, Mr. Chairman.
Alistair Scott.